The title of the talk today is The Medieval Origins of Global Law. This is an excerpt from a chapter in my book coming out soon on global legal culture. I've adapted and changed it somewhat, but this small segment hopefully will be clear. The Western legal heritage includes two very distinct traditions. The differences between those two systems has important meanings in the global age. They are the continental or civil law tradition, operative on the continent of Europe and about 200 countries worldwide. The other is the English common law or Anglophone tradition. It operates in Britain and the United States, as well as the few other countries that were once colonies of the British Empire. Although outwardly the two legal methods appear to be very similar, in fact they are very different in ways that they are constructed and the purposes they serve. To understand those differences and how they shape the global age, it is useful to return to the historic past and examine their beginnings. In fact, they both originated almost exactly simultaneously during the medieval period about 1,000 years ago. That is, around 1000 AD, when a major reformation of Christian church and empire occurred. At that time, the church attempted to consolidate its authority by adopting a legal structure. It did so by employing the ancient Roman Code of Justinian that had been rediscovered after lying in the archives for more than 500 years. That ancient law code became the basis for a system of law that quickly spread over all Christendom. In this atmosphere of legal change, two historic events took place. One event was the founding of the University of Bologna, Italy in 1088, the first university in European history. With the sudden and widespread use of law, there was an urgent need for advocates, notaries, and jurists. The university was established specifically by scholars who studied and taught from the ancient code of Justinian. The difficulty was to mine from that voluminous and sophisticated imperial law a selection of statutes and procedures appropriate to a rather backward and agrarian medieval Europe. Originally, the law taught at Bologna included both religious and secular aspects of rule. It was a parallel system known as the jus commune, or common law of Christendom. Over time, other universities were established to teach law, for example, Paris, Marseille, Oxford, Cambridge, and elsewhere. Eventually, teachings at these universities came to include the theology of Augustine, scientific and medical subjects, as well as philosophy, especially the philosophy of Aristotle. The result was a high level of scholarship covering a range of disciplines, a unity of learning that culminated in the study of theology and jurisprudence. The jus commune was thought to be a universal and rational law that operated according to moral values and was applicable in all Christian lands. Although both Muslims and Jews were accepted to have their own laws, disputes between Christians and non-Christians were problematic and might require special intervention by bishop or lord. Nonetheless, scholars of law, often churchmen, were the most important persons in the legal hierarchy. Their sophistication and learning reached a very high level, culminating in the person Thomas Aquinas after around 1200 AD. However, eventually, as that tradition entered the modern world, it became secularized and known as the civil or continental law. Although bereft of its religious elements, it retained the central role of the university scholar, the principle of reason in its operation, and the common good as its purpose. The other major turning point during that period was the Norman conquest of England in 1066, the single most important event in English history. That catastrophic invasion was led by the Norman French king William the Conqueror. It brought violent death to thousands of men, women, and children, and the forced depopulation of entire regions. Virtually all arable land was given over to a newly installed Norman French nobility, but it also ultimately gave rise to the English tradition of common law. After the conquest, England was ruled as a servile kingdom, often by absentee monarchs, and primarily as a source of revenue. Although the kingdom was organized according to the jus commune, the law of Christendom, it was ruled by a particularly harsh and highly centralized form of Norman kingship. Strict methods of subjugation were possible because England itself was a virtually inescapable island kingdom. In consolidating his rule, King William established 3 special royal courts of justice that were separate from the regular medieval courts and accountable to him personally. Originally, they were intended to arbitrate disputes among the nobility over possession and title to land. Land was very important at the time because it was the primary form of wealth. Initially, these courts were administered by jurists trained in Italy, but as high officials, they were assisted in their work by a retinue of servants, messengers, and orderlies who performed the mundane chores of legal procedure. Those functionaries, in the custom of the time, organized themselves into closed fraternal guilds of trade to protect their royal employment. However, in 1166, 100 years after the conquest, the kingdom was shaken by a dispute between King Henry II and the jurists. As a result, he expelled them and appointed the guildsmen in their place. The guildsmen were granted an exclusive monopoly to traffic in the commerce of litigation within the 3 special courts. The arrangement worked well for the king because the guildsmen were self-supporting from the fees and gratuities they extracted from their clients. At the same time, bails, fines, and forfeitures poured into the royal treasury. Eventually, this guild tradition became known as the English common law. Their work consisted in the sale of transaction and procedure. Yet despite this innovation, the wider law of Christendom, the jus commune, remained the law of the English monarchy. It continued to be taught in both universities, Oxford and Cambridge, and continued to operate in many royal departments and courts. Unsurprisingly, the university tradition was regarded by the guildsmen as a threat to their legal commerce. At the same time, the scholars dismiss the guildsmen as not comprising a genuine legal system, but rather as being mere functionaries who enrich themselves in an arbitrary bureau of government. Unlike the law of the universities, guild practice had no necessary connection with the religious or moral tenets of the age. At the same time, the guild members, only semi-literate, conducted their affairs virtually without books. Their practice simply followed records handed down from predecessor to successor, preserved on scrolls. Their work, neither established on announced principles nor guided by public norms, is sometimes described as being value-free. Their doctrines were situational, developed by consensus among the members. As a system of commerce, Anglophone law operated on a division of knowledge. The public would not know the internal logic by which the system worked. Thus, while the continental law engaged the public on the principle of reason, workings of the common law were necessarily accepted on the principle of faith. One major incompatibility important in the global age is the difference in approach each has to global governance. That is, the principal predictability of the civil law versus the malleable adaptability of the English language law. Both behaviors are traceable to their different medieval origins.